The first sound wasn't applause. It was the thin, nervous feedback of a microphone waking up, a hiss that cut through a room filled with diamonds, champagne, and people who believed they owned the night. On stage, under a chandelier that looked like frozen lightning, a woman stood with her hands perfectly still at her sides. Gold caught the light as she moved, not glittery, not loud, the kind of gold that looks like it has weight. Somewhere in the crowd, a glass touched another glass. Clink. And in that small sound, every smile sharpened. A man in a midnight tuxedo, handsome in the way money can polish a face, leaned toward the nearest cameras, still wearing the grin he wore when he bought companies and called it vision. He didn't look worried, not yet. The woman's eyes went past him, past the front row, past the investors and the socialites and the polite predators. Her gaze landed on the far back wall, glass panels reflecting the room like it was a museum exhibit. In that reflection, she saw the shape of her old self, smaller, quiet, convenient. Then she looked forward again, and when she spoke, her voice didn't tremble. "Tonight," she said, "I'd like to thank Ashford Capital Group for proving something to me." A pause, perfectly measured, that a skyline can be stolen if the architect stays silent. The man's smile faltered, just a hairline crack. A woman beside him, sleek hair, a dress like spilled ink, tilted her chin, still smug, still certain the world was arranged for her comfort. The woman in gold turned a fraction, and the necklace at her throat flashed. Not a delicate sparkle, a cold flare, white fire trapped inside facets. You could feel the room understand without knowing why that this wasn't jewelry. It was a signature, a claim, a warning. The woman lifted a folder, thin, ordinary, so ordinary it looked out of place among the marble and velvet. Then she said softly, almost kindly, "This is my divorce petition." And the folder slipped from her fingers. It fell like a guillotine. A hush spread outward like ink in water. The man on the floor, Gideon Ashford, finally turned toward her, his face tightening. He didn't say her name. He couldn't, because in this room, names were currency, and he had spent hers for years. The woman on stage leaned toward the mic again. "And before I sign off," she added, "I have one condition for the Halcyon Skybridge project." She glanced at the man seated beside Gideon, Marcus Crowell, the developer every billionaire wanted in their corner. "Apex Atelier will donate the final design and land rights at no cost." A wave of murmurs rose. Gideon's eyes lit. Hope, reflexive greed, relief, until she finished. "On one condition," she said. "Ashford Capital is permanently barred from participating. No bids, no subsidiaries, no proxies, nothing." It took a second for the sentence to land. Then the air went out of Gideon Ashford's lungs. Somewhere behind him, a camera shutter fired like a gunshot. Click! The woman in gold, Ilara Wren, didn't look at the cameras. She looked at Gideon like she was reading a blueprint, and then she smiled, small, controlled. "Don't worry," she said, voice calm. "I'll make this clean. A beat. Unlike you." And right then, as the room began to tilt, as power started to slide from one hand to another, Ilara Wren didn't know yet that the most painful part wouldn't be the public collapse. It would be the moment Gideon finally understood. He had spent 3 years living with a masterpiece and never once looked up. To understand how Crownport City ended up holding its breath under a chandelier, we have to go back. Not to the beginning of their love story, because this isn't a love story. We have to go back to the first time Ilara realized. In Gideon Ashford's world, a wife could exist like furniture, useful when it matched the room and invisible when it didn't. The Aurelia Tower didn't feel like a home. It felt like a statement. A vertical slab of glass rising above Crownport like a rich man's raised chin. All reflective surfaces, all clean angles, all cold perfection. In the penthouse, there were no family photos, no clutter, no soft corners. Everything was curated the way brands curate a personality, expensive enough to intimidate, empty enough to never reveal anything real. Ilara Wren moved through it quietly, not because she was naturally quiet, because the space punished sound. The floors were polished stone, footsteps echoed like mistakes. The walls were glass. Every reflection was an accusation. And Gideon Ashford, her husband, loved it that way. Gideon loved environments where emotions couldn't leave fingerprints. He came home late most nights, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and rooms that weren't his. He would loosen his tie like a man doing someone a favor by breathing the same air. When he spoke, he rarely used her name. It was always something vague. "Are you done with that? Is dinner handled? Don't schedule anything without checking with my office." Like she was a staff member who'd wandered into the wrong uniform. At first, Ilara told herself it was stress. New marriage, new demands, a billionaire's calendar. She told herself he'd soften. She told herself he didn't know how to be gentle yet. But time is honest. And after months, time had revealed the truth. Gideon Ashford didn't want a partner. He wanted an accessory. Someone who looked good standing near him and looked quiet doing it. He introduced her at events with a smile that never reached his eyes. "My wife," he'd say, as if the two words completed a set. Then he would turn away mid-conversation, leaving her holding silence like a purse. When people asked what Ilara did, Gideon would answer for her. "She's creative," he'd say lightly, dismissively, as if it was a harmless hobby. "She keeps busy." And Ilara would smile the way you smile when you're trapped in a room full of mirrors. In the first year, she tried. She invited him to dinner without his phone. She asked about his childhood. She asked about what he wanted when he wasn't performing. He stared at her like she'd spoken in another language. Then he gave her a small laugh. "You're sweet," he said, "but you're not built for that side of my world." That was the first time the word landed in her chest like a nail. Built. As if she were a structure. As if she could be evaluated for load-bearing capacity. As if she were a decorative arch, never meant to carry weight. Ilara swallowed her pride and kept going because she had chosen this marriage for a reason. Not for money, not for status. Ilara had grown up in Crownport's older neighborhoods, brick and iron railings, streets that smelled like rain on hot stone. Her mother had been a practical woman who believed in survival. Her father had been an artist who believed in meaning. They both taught Ilara something important. A life can break you if you don't decide what you're willing to trade. And Ilara had decided, long before Gideon, that she would not trade her identity for comfort. That vow had a shape. It had a name. Apex Atelier. The firm Ilara helped build from almost nothing. Not as a face, not as a celebrity, but as a mind. A ghost. A legend. In the architecture world of Crownport, there was a name whispered in boardrooms and studio halls. A name attached to impossible designs and clean miracles. The Architect. No one knew who the Architect was. Not really. There were rumors. Some said a retired genius. Some said a collective. Some said a foreign prodigy hidden behind lawyers. But Ilara Wren knew the truth. Because she had been the architect since she was 22. She had built Apex Atelier with her hands stained by ink and late-night coffee. She had drawn lines that turned into bridges. She had watched her ideas become steel. She had signed nothing with her real name. Because the world loved genius, but it loved controlling genius more. So Ilara wore her anonymity like armor. And when she married Gideon Ashford 3 years ago, she made herself a promise. This marriage would be hers, not her company's, not her legend's. If Gideon loved her, he would have to love Ilara, not the architect. So she hid the truth. She didn't brag. She didn't correct him. She didn't mention that the skyline he admired, the towers he pointed at from the penthouse window, were drawn first on her desk. She thought the silence would protect something pure. Instead, it gave Gideon permission to erase her. And in the second year, he started erasing her in public. That's when Sloane Voss arrived. Not introduced as a mistress, never as something so crude. Sloane came wrapped in respectable language. Brand consultant, cultural liaison, investor relations. She sat beside Gideon at dinners that should have belonged to Alara. She laughed a little too loud at his jokes. She touched his arm like she was placing a flag. And Gideon, who loved ownership more than affection, let her. Sometimes he even seemed pleased by Alara's stillness, like her silence made his betrayal cleaner. When Alara asked, once carefully, what Sloane was to him, Gideon didn't deny it. He didn't confess either. He simply looked at her, impatient. "Don't be dramatic," he said. "This is business." Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "And don't embarrass me." Those words became the rule of their marriage. Don't embarrass me. Don't ask questions at events. Don't correct me. Don't look sad in photos. Don't make people wonder. Alara learned to keep her face smooth. She learned to be a shadow. But shadows have edges. And in the third year, Gideon crossed a line so sharp it finally cut through her restraint. It happened on a Tuesday night, in the glass kitchen, under lights too white to forgive. Gideon tossed a folder onto the counter like it was trash. "I need your signature," he said. Alara glanced at the paperwork. Loan documents, collateral, her name printed in bold. Her eyes narrowed. "This is under my name," she said carefully. Gideon didn't even look embarrassed. "It's fine," he said, pouring himself a drink. "It's just paperwork. Your name has weight." Alara felt the room shift. "My name has weight," she repeated. He finally looked at her, annoyed. "Don't start," he said. "This is how things work." Ilara's fingers hovered over the papers as if the ink could burn. "What exactly is this for?" she asked. Gideon took a sip, smiled like a man indulging a child. "A project," he said. "A big one. A headline." Alara looked again. The lender, the numbers, the structure. It wasn't paperwork. It was theft. Quiet, elegant theft. Her voice lowered. "You're using my identity to borrow money," she said. Gideon shrugged. "I'm your husband." The sentence was a lock clicking into place. In his mind, marriage wasn't partnership. It was permission. Alara pushed the folder back. "I'm not signing this," she said. For the first time in months, Gideon's eyes sharpened. He set his glass down with a controlled clink. "You will," he said, not a request, a command. Alara met his stare. "No," she repeated. The silence that followed was thick enough to build walls. Then Gideon leaned forward slightly, voice quiet but lethal. "You need to remember your place, Alara." A beat. "And before the Sovereign Gala next month, get yourself together. I have partners flying in. Crowell will be there. Don't be whatever this is." Whatever this is. As if her integrity were a messy hairstyle. Then Gideon picked up his phone. And in the reflection of the glass cabinets, Alara watched her own face. Not crying, not shouting, just waking up. Because something inside her, something patient and precise, had finally decided. If Gideon wanted to treat her like a structure, she would become one. Not decorative, load-bearing. And if he wanted to borrow her name, she would make him pay interest. Not in money, in humiliation, in loss, in the kind of collapse you can't rebuild from. The blueprint began that night, not drawn on paper, drawn inside her. A line, straight and uncompromising, and it led, inevitably, to the Sovereign Gala. The weeks leading to the Crownport Sovereign Gala felt like living in a museum exhibit called A Perfect Marriage. Every magazine wanted photos. Every charity wanted Gideon's attendance. Every investor wanted a handshake. And Gideon wanted Alara to behave like a flawless background. There were fittings scheduled by assistants. Hair appointments prepaid like bribes. A stylist Gideon hired without asking Alara's opinion. She let them do it. Not because she had surrendered, because she was studying the machinery. There was a certain kind of cruelty that only wealthy people can afford. Not shouting, not violence, just gentle, relentless invalidation. Gideon's favorite type. At one pre-gala dinner, Alara sat beside him while Sloane Voss sat across, close enough that their knees could touch beneath the table. Sloane smiled at Alara with a softness that wasn't kindness. It was superiority wrapped in silk. "You must be so proud," Sloane said, swirling her wine. "Gideon's expansion is impressive." Alara nodded politely. Gideon cut in smoothly. "She doesn't really follow the details," he said. "She's more aesthetic." A laugh flickered around the table, not cruel enough to be obvious, just enough to remind Alara where she was supposed to stand. Alara felt the old sting rise, hot, immediate. Then she swallowed it down, because somewhere under her calm face, another part of her was building. At night, when Gideon was out, Alara sat alone in the penthouse study. Not his study. He called it my office. But Alara sat there anyway, because the windows gave her a view of Crownport's skyline. And the skyline reminded her of what she truly was. She opened a laptop that wasn't connected to the Aurelia Towers network. She logged into a system with layered security and quiet power. Apex Atelier. Her world. Her truth. The messages were waiting. Design approvals, material revisions, structural calculations. A community center proposal in the East District that she'd been quietly funding for 2 years. Alara read them like letters from her real life. Then she clicked open a separate folder. A folder labeled simply, Ashford. Inside were screenshots, bank statements, email chains, loan applications, digital signatures. Evidence. Not gathered overnight, gathered patiently, with help. Because Alara wasn't alone. The first time she reached out, really reached out, was to Julian Cade. Julian had been her friend since university, back when both of them were broke, ambitious, and stubborn. Back when Julian wrote code on a laptop with a cracked screen and Alara drafted buildings on cheap paper because she couldn't afford a tablet. Julian had always been the one who saw her clearly. Not as a pretty woman, not as an accessory, as a mind. They hadn't dated. They hadn't needed to. Some connections were deeper than romance. They were built from late nights, shared dreams, and the kind of respect that doesn't disappear when life gets complicated. Julian was now a tech billionaire. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind who didn't need to announce himself. He owned Cade Systems, a company that built infrastructure for cities, data grids, security frameworks, the invisible skeleton that made modern life possible. He knew how power hid, and he knew how to pull it into the light. When Alara called him after that Tuesday night, Julian didn't ask why she'd waited so long. He just listened. Then he said calmly, "Okay, tell me what you need." Alara had stared out at the skyline when she answered. "I need proof," she said, "and I need control." Julian's voice had been steady. "Then we build it," he said, "like we always do." So they built it. Julian's team traced financial flows like blood trails. They identified accounts Gideon thought were invisible. They verified falsified signatures. They documented the pattern. And Alara, precise as always, began building her second structure. Not a bridge, not a tower, a collapse. She also contacted Vivian Hart. Vivian was a lawyer with a reputation for being impossible to intimidate. She didn't smile much. She didn't care who your father was. And she had an unusual respect for Alara. Not because Alara was rich, because Alara was careful. And careful people are always dangerous. Vivian reviewed the evidence and said something that made Alara's mouth go dry. "If we move right," Vivian said, "we can freeze his accounts. We can shut down his access to capital. We can make his partners run." Alara whispered, "Good." Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do you want this private?" she asked. Alara looked at her own reflection in the glass window. A woman in a luxury cage. A woman who had been told for 3 years to stay pretty and quiet. Alara's voice was flat. "No," she said. "I want it loud." That was the moment the plan took its final shape. The Sovereign Gala would be the stage. Because Gideon loved stages. He loved attention. He loved being admired. So Alara would take that from him. Not in a corner, not in whispers, in front of everyone who mattered. But Alara needed one more piece. The piece Gideon was obsessed with. The project. Every time Gideon talked about the Halcyon Sky Bridge, his eyes lit with hunger. The bridge would connect the financial district to the newly developing waterfront. A symbol, a monument, a money machine. Whoever controlled it would control headlines, contracts, and political favor. Gideon wanted that bridge because it would immortalize him. He didn't want to be rich. He wanted to be permanent. The problem was Gideon needed Marcus Crowell. Crowell Developments had the political and logistical network to make the bridge happen. Without Crowell, Gideon's dream stayed a concept. And Crowell didn't like Gideon. Crowell tolerated him because Gideon came with capital. But Crowell trusted performance only as far as it could be audited. Ilara knew Crowell would be at the gala, so she did what architects do best. She designed an offer no one could refuse. Apex Atelier would donate the final design, and more than that, Ilara would quietly acquire the land rights essential for the project's anchoring points. It was expensive, but Ilara had been wealthy far longer than Gideon realized. She didn't flaunt it. She invested. She positioned. She purchased. Through layered entities and legal frameworks, she began buying, not just land, leverage. And the Aurelia Tower penthouse? The place Gideon called ours? It wasn't his. Not anymore. Ilara didn't buy it in anger. She bought it the way she bought everything else, with precision. The deed transferred quietly. No press, no drama, just a signature, just a line drawn. When the time came, she would tell Gideon to leave, and he would. Because for once, the glass walls would reflect his own emptiness back at him. Still, despite the plan, the wound continued. Because even with a blueprint for revenge, being erased hurts. At the final pre-gala event, Gideon approached Ilara in a corridor lined with gold-framed portraits. He adjusted her necklace, cheap, temporary, something his stylist picked. His fingers were cold. "Smile," he murmured. "Crowell will be watching." Ilara smiled. Then Gideon leaned in closer, voice low enough to be private. "If you do anything strange," he said, "if you say anything unnecessary," his hand tightened briefly on her shoulder, "you'll regret it." Ilara's smile didn't change. She nodded like a compliant wife. Gideon stepped back, satisfied. He walked away toward Sloane, who was waiting like a reward. Ilara watched them, and something inside her, quiet, long-suffering, stopped begging to be seen. It hardened, not into hatred, into clarity. She whispered to herself, so softly no one heard, "Don't worry." A pause. "I won't embarrass you." She didn't mean what Gideon thought, because Ilara wasn't going to embarrass him. Embarrassment was temporary. Ilara was going to dismantle him. And like any good architect, she would do it in a way that looked inevitable. The week of the Sovereign Gala arrived like a storm. Crownport City dressed itself up. Banners, lights, security. The gala wasn't just a party, it was a marketplace for power. Deals were made in corners. Laws were influenced by laughter. Charities were funded as PR insurance. The guest list was carefully curated. CEOs, council members, developers, influencers, old money families who treated new money like noise. Gideon Ashford was in his element. He walked through the penthouse in the morning, issuing commands into his phone like he owned time. "Ilara's gown needs to be understated," he told someone. "No theatrics." Ilara listened from the doorway. Understated. No theatrics. She almost smiled. Because Gideon's biggest mistake was believing he controlled her appearance. He controlled what he saw, and he had never really looked. Ilara's actual gown was waiting elsewhere, not in the Aurelia Tower, in a private suite arranged by Julian. The designer had been chosen not for trends, but for symbolism. A gown that would photograph like sunlight. Gold that looked like power, fabric that moved like certainty, and the necklace, the one that would make people inhale without realizing they were doing it, wasn't borrowed. It belonged to Ilara. A family piece held quietly, insured quietly, worn never. Until now. When she opened the case, the diamonds didn't sparkle like decoration. They flashed like teeth. Julian stood nearby, hands in his pockets, calm as always. "You don't have to do this publicly," he said gently. Ilara's fingers hovered over the necklace. I do, she replied. Julian nodded once. Then we do it clean, he said. That was Julian's gift. He didn't push. He didn't take control. He just supported the structure she built. Vinny and Hart arrived an hour later with a slim binder. No dramatic speeches, no excitement, just legal certainty. Banking injunction is ready, Vivian said. The moment you give the signal, we file. Accounts freeze. Credit lines cut. Ilara accepted the binder. And the fraud evidence? Vivian's eyes were sharp. Organized, verified. We have multiple points of authentication. Ilara exhaled slowly. There was a particular kind of calm that came before disaster. Not fear, not adrenaline, a silence so precise it felt like a ruler line. Ilara opened a second binder. Inside was the deed to the Aurelia Tower penthouse. Her name, only her name. She ran her thumb over it once, not as a trophy, as closure. Then she looked at Julian. Crowell? She asked. Julian's mouth twitched. He's curious, Julian said. He doesn't know why Apex Atelier wants to donate a design, but he's curious enough to listen. Ilara nodded. Curiosity is an opening, she said. Julian's eyes warmed with an old memory. You still talk like you're in studio, he said. Ilara glanced at him. I never left, she answered, because that was the truth. Even while playing Invisible Wife, Ilara had been building cities. She had been designing spaces where people could breathe. Gideon had been busy collecting applause. Ilara had been busy making permanence. As the day moved toward evening, Ilara practiced nothing. She didn't rehearse speeches in a mirror. She didn't run lines. Because this wasn't acting. This was revealing. She only did one thing. She wrote a single sentence on a blank page. A sentence she would say when Gideon looked at her like she didn't matter. She wrote, You built your empire on my name. Tonight I take it back. She folded the page and placed it in her clutch. Then, with Vivian and Julian as quiet pillars behind her, she stepped into the black car that would take her to the Sovereign Gala. The city outside the window looked different now. Not like something she needed to impress, like something that belonged to her. The car approached the venue, Crownport Hall, where the gala was held. A building with tall columns, marble steps, and a facade that screamed history. Cameras flashed. The red carpet glittered with manufactured intimacy. As they arrived, Julian touched Ilara's elbow, a gentle grounding. You're steady? He asked. Ilara's eyes didn't waver. I'm done being invisible, she said. Julian nodded. Vivian simply said, When you're ready. Ilara stepped out, and for a moment, she wore the outfit Gideon expected. The understated dress, the polite smile, the quiet posture. She entered the hall as Ilara, the accessory. She let people glance past her. She let Gideon see her and feel satisfied. Because architects understand something important. You don't demolish a building by hitting the front door. You remove the supports. You let it stand until everyone trusts it. Then you pull. Inside the gala, the lighting was warm enough to flatter and sharp enough to show status. Crystal glasses, silver trays, music like a heartbeat. Gideon found Ilara near a sculptural centerpiece and approached her like an owner checking an item's condition. He looked her up and down. Good, he said. Don't drift. Crowell is here, and keep your answers simple. Ilara nodded. Yes, Gideon. He didn't notice the way her voice sounded almost amused. Sloane Voss arrived moments later, looping her arm through Gideon's as if she had every right. She glanced at Ilara, smile smooth. Ilara, she said sweetly, you look lovely. Lovely was what you called a lamp. Gideon didn't even wait for Ilara to respond. He guided Sloane away toward Marcus Crowell and a cluster of investors, leaving Ilara alone beside the centerpiece, invisible again. But tonight, invisibility was a weapon. Because while Gideon performed in the center of the room, Ilara moved through the edges. She watched, she listened. She noted who deferred to whom. She noticed the way Crowell's eyes drifted to the architectural renderings displayed near the stage, teasers of the Halcyon Skybridge concept. Crowell wasn't impressed by money. He was impressed by inevitability. Ilara waited until the right moment. Then she moved, not toward Gideon, toward Crowell. Crowell turned as she approached, polite, distant. "Ilara Wren," he said, offering a handshake with professional neutrality. Ilara shook his hand. "Marcus Crowell," she replied. "Thank you for coming." Crowell's eyes flicked to Gideon across the room, then back to her. "Gideon seems confident," Crowell said. Ilara's smile was small. "Gideon is often confident," she said. "That's not the same as being secure." Crowell's mouth twitched, almost amused. "You have an opinion," he observed. Ilara tilted her head slightly. "I have information," she corrected. Crowell's eyes sharpened. "Go on," he said. Ilara leaned in just enough that it felt like privacy. "Apex Atelier will be making an announcement tonight," she said, "about the Sky Bridge." Crowell's posture changed, subtle, attentive. "That's unexpected," he said. Ilara nodded. "It will benefit you," she said, "but only if you can accept one condition." Crowell studied her. He wasn't a fool. He knew conditions meant leverage. "What condition?" he asked. Ilara's gaze moved briefly to Gideon, who was laughing at something Sloane said. Then Ilara returned her eyes to Crowell. "Your project cannot include Ashford Capital," she said calmly. "Not directly, not indirectly." Crowell's eyebrows lifted. That was an audacious request, almost suicidal in a room like this. But Ilara didn't flinch. Crowell's eyes narrowed. "And why would Apex Atelier agree to that?" he asked. "Ashford is the one courting me." Ilara's smile remained. "Because Ashford doesn't control Apex Atelier," she said. Crowell stared. A pause, just long enough for curiosity to open. "Who does?" he asked. Ilara didn't answer, not yet. She simply said, "Wait for the stage." Then she stepped back into the crowd and disappeared again. Crowell watched her go, suspicion and interest mixing like chemicals. Gideon, meanwhile, felt triumphant. He had no idea the support beams were already being removed. No idea that the woman he had reduced to a shadow was about to turn the lights on. The night moved toward its centerpiece, the charity auction and the major announcement. Gideon positioned himself near the stage like a man preparing for worship. He wanted to be seen when the Halcyon Skybridge was mentioned. He wanted his face in the photos. He wanted history to associate his name with the bridge. Ilara stayed near the perimeter, still in the understated dress, still quiet, still invisible. And that's why Gideon didn't worry. When the host called Gideon's name, "Please welcome Gideon Ashford of Ashford Capital Group, a visionary investor shaping Crownport's future." Gideon stepped onto the stage with effortless charm. Applause rose. He smiled, soaking it in. He spoke about prosperity, community, vision. Words that sounded noble in rooms with expensive chairs. Behind him, screens displayed conceptual images of the Sky Bridge, sleek lines, glowing paths, dramatic arches. Gideon gestured grandly. "This bridge," he said, "will be a symbol, not just of connection, but of what Crownport can become when ambition meets opportunity." More applause. Sloane Voss watched from the front, proud like she'd contributed. Ilara watched from the edge, face unreadable. Gideon continued. "And we are honored to collaborate with Apex Atelier, the legendary design firm behind Crownport's most iconic projects." A shift in the room. Even people who didn't care about architecture recognized the name. Apex Atelier wasn't just a firm, it was a myth. Gideon smiled wider. "I've always said," he added, "that Apex understands the soul of this city. Their work, it's genius." He paused, dramatic. "And tonight, we have a surprise." He turned toward the host, confident. The host leaned toward the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host said, "Apex Atelier has sent a representative to speak." A murmur rippled. Gideon glanced around, expecting some distinguished architect to appear. Ilara's mouth softened with something close to pity, because Gideon still didn't see her. Not as she slipped away into a side corridor, not as she changed into the gold dress, not as she fastened the diamond necklace at her throat, not as she walked back toward the ballroom with a new gravity in her steps. The doors opened, and Ilara entered like sunrise. The room turned without meaning to. Heads pivoted, conversations died, even the music seemed to hesitate. Gold light caught on her gown, on the diamonds, on her skin. She didn't look like a wife. She looked like someone who had never needed permission. Gideon, on stage, stared. For the first time in 3 years, he looked genuinely confused. Sloane's smile tightened. Ilara walked forward, every step measured, camera ready, inevitable. She didn't rush. She didn't apologize. She approached the stairs to the stage. The host stepped aside, startled. Ilara climbed. Gideon's hands twitched at his sides. "Ilara," he began, voice low, warning. Ilara didn't look at him yet. She faced the crowd. The microphone hissed softly, that same thin sound from the hook, a breath held by hundreds of throats. Then Ilara spoke. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was calm, resonant, made for rooms like this. "My name is Ilara Wren." A polite pause. "And for the past decade, the city of Crownport has known my work." She let that hang. "Even if it didn't know my face." The room stilled. Ilara turned her head slightly. She looked at the giant screens behind her, still showing Apex's signature style. Then she looked back at the crowd. "I am the architect." It hit like a collision, a gasp, a ripple of disbelief. A few people actually laughed. Tiny, shocked laughs, because the mind rejects what rearranges reality. Gideon's face drained of color. Sloane's eyes widened, then narrowed. Marcus Crowell in the front didn't look surprised. He looked satisfied, as if a puzzle piece had clicked. Ilara continued. "Apex Atelier has designed much of the skyline you admire," she said. "The Meridian Spire, the Orpheum Renewal, the Harbor Line Promenade." People murmured, recognizing names like sacred objects. Ilara's voice remained steady. "And I have heard Gideon Ashford praise these projects," she said, glancing briefly toward him. Gideon's jaw tightened. Ilara's eyes held his for 1 second, not pleading, not angry, just clear. "Tonight," she said, returning to the crowd, "I'm here to discuss the Halcyon Sky Bridge." Gideon inhaled, trying to regain control. "Ilara," he hissed under his breath, "what are you doing?" Ilara didn't answer him. She addressed the room. "Apex Atelier will donate the final design and essential land usage rights to Crowell Developments," she announced. The crowd erupted in murmurs. A donation like that was unheard of. Money moved like blood in rooms like this. No one donated power. Gideon's eyes flashed, hope surging despite himself. This could still be his. This could still be spun. He began to smile again. And that's when Ilara added softly, "On one condition." Silence. Ilara turned toward Marcus Crowell. "Marcus," she said, voice warm, professional, "you may proceed with the Skybridge project." Her eyes flicked barely toward Gideon. "As long as Ashford Capital Group is permanently barred from participating." The sentence fell. The room froze. Gideon's smile collapsed. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Sloane's face tightened, fury flashing. Crowell didn't hesitate. He stood slowly and raised his glass. "Accepted," he said. The word echoed like a verdict. Gideon lurched forward half a step. "This is," he started, voice cracking, "this is insane!" Ilara finally turned to face him fully. Under the stage lights, her eyes looked almost silver. "It's not insane," she said quietly. "It's precise." Gideon's voice rose, sharp. "You can't do this," he snapped. "You're my wife!" Ilara's smile was small. "And you treated me like an object," she said. Objects don't get to protect you. A murmur of approval moved through the crowd, not loud but undeniable. Ilara lifted a second folder, the thin one. "This," she said, "is the second part of tonight's announcement." Gideon's eyes flicked to it like a man staring at a weapon. Ilara opened it and withdrew printed documents. "Over the past year," she said, "Ashford Capital has used my name to secure loans." Gideon barked out a laugh that sounded wrong. "That's private," he said. "This is a misunderstanding." Ilara's voice remained calm. "It's not a misunderstanding," she said. "It's fraud." Vivian Hart rose from the crowd and stepped forward, her presence like a blade. "I'm Vivian Hart," Vivian said, "counsel for Ilara Wren. We have verified evidence of identity misuse, unauthorized borrowing, and concealed accounts." The word accounts made heads tilt. Because in this room, concealed accounts meant scandal. It meant prison. It meant exile. Gideon's face contorted. "You set me up," he hissed at Ilara. Ilara blinked slowly. "No," she said. "You built the trap. I just stopped pretending not to see it." Then Ilara lifted one more document, a deed. "This penthouse," she said, "is no longer Ashford property." Gideon's eyes went wild. "What are you talking about?" he snapped. Ilara held the deed up for cameras. "I purchased the Aurelia Tower penthouse 6 months ago," she said. Quietly. Gasps. The Aurelia Tower penthouse was famous, a symbol of Gideon's status, a trophy, and now... Ilara continued, voice cool. "I'm requesting that Gideon Ashford vacate the premises immediately," she said. "Security will escort him if necessary." Gideon's hands trembled. Sloane leaned toward him, whispering urgently, eyes darting. Ilara's gaze didn't even acknowledge Sloane. She reached into her clutch and withdrew the final item, a signed divorce petition. She didn't slam it. She didn't throw it like a tantrum. She simply held it out. A clean line drawn across a life. "Gideon," she said, her voice almost gentle, "this is the end." Gideon's chest rose and fell fast. "You think you can ruin me?" he spat. Ilara's eyes stayed calm. "I'm not ruining you," she said. "I'm removing myself from the story you wrote." Then she let the papers fall. They fluttered down like snow. The room was silent as a courtroom. Gideon stood on stage, suddenly too visible. For the first time, everyone saw what Ilara had always seen. Behind the charm, behind the money, behind the performance, was a man terrified of losing control. And in that terror, he made his worst mistake. He reached for Ilara's wrist, not hard enough to be a headline, just enough to be unmistakably possessive. Ilara didn't yank away dramatically. She simply stepped back, and Julian Cade appeared, quiet, immediate, placing himself between them with effortless authority. Julian didn't touch Gideon. He didn't need to. He just looked at him. A look that said, "You don't get to claim what you never valued." Security shifted. Cameras flashed. Gideon's throat worked. He looked around at the crowd, searching for allies. But in rooms like this, loyalty is rented. And Gideon's credit had just been cut. Ilara stepped forward one last time into the microphone. Her voice softened. "Crownport has a saying," she said. "Glass towers reflect everything." She glanced toward the back wall of windows. "Tonight," she said, "I hope you all see clearly." Then she stepped away, and the applause that rose was not polite. It was volcanic, not for drama, for justice, for a woman who refused to stay invisible. Gideon Ashford stood frozen as the stage lights made him look pale. Sloane's hand slipped from his arm, not because she was offended, because she was calculating, and calculation has no loyalty. Ilara walked down the stairs, gold moving through a stunned room. Julian followed at a respectful distance. Vinian remained behind, already speaking to officials, already filing, already locking the doors Gideon didn't know existed. As Ilara reached the edge of the ballroom, she heard a familiar sound. Clink! 2 glasses touching. A celebration, not of Gideon's vision, of his collapse. And somewhere deep inside Ilara, the wound that had been bleeding quietly for 3 years closed. Not with forgiveness, with freedom. Gideon Ashford didn't lose everything in a day. He lost it in layers, like paint peeling, like a building cracking. The first layer was immediate: reputation. By morning, every major outlet in Crownport had photos. Ilara in gold, Gideon pale, papers falling. Headlines framed it as a scandal, a betrayal, a power shift. But the people who mattered didn't read headlines. They made calls. And Gideon's calls started going unanswered. The second layer was capital. Vivian Hart moved fast, faster than Gideon believed possible. Injunctions filed, accounts flagged, credit frozen. Banks that had once greeted Gideon with smiles now spoke to him through legal departments. One of Gideon's executives tried to reassure him. "It's temporary," the man said, sweating. "We'll clarify." But you can't clarify fraud. You can only survive it. And survival requires allies. Gideon's allies disappeared. Partners withdrew. Boards demanded explanations. Investors panicked. Within a week, the Ashford Capital Group's stock, once steady, started dropping. Not because the company was suddenly worthless, because confidence is fragile. And Gideon's face had become associated with risk. Sloan Voss stayed for the first few days. She went on talk shows. She posed as supportive. She said, "We're focused on the future." But Ilara's evidence wasn't just strong, it was surgical. Emails, transfers, identity misuse. It wasn't a rumor, it was a map. And when Sloan realized Gideon might be more liability than ladder, she began to detach. One night, Gideon came home, still to the penthouse, because he hadn't processed that he no longer belonged there. He found his access card didn't work. He swiped again. Red light. Again. Red light. A security guard approached, polite but firm. "Mr. Ashford," the guard said, "your access has been revoked." Gideon stared. "This is my home," he snapped. The guard didn't argue. He simply handed Gideon an envelope. Inside was a letter from Vivian Hart. Legally worded, coldly specific. "Vacate within 72 hours. Gideon's fingers tightened around the paper. He looked up at the penthouse windows above. Glass, reflecting the city, reflecting him. A man locked out of his own myth. He turned away, jaw clenched so hard it looked painful. Later, Gideon tried to fight the divorce. He hired expensive lawyers. He claimed Ilara was unstable. He claimed she was manipulated. He claimed she didn't understand what she was doing. But courts don't care about arrogance. They care about evidence. And Ilara had evidence in clean stacks. Every time Gideon tried to argue, Vivian presented another document, another email, another discrepancy. The judge didn't need to raise their voice. The truth was louder than Gideon's defenses. When the divorce was finalized, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. A signature, a stamp, a line drawn. Ilara walked out of the courthouse without cameras. No triumphant statements, no tears, just a breath, as if she had been holding it for years. A few weeks later, Ashford Capital declared bankruptcy. Gideon's empire didn't explode, it collapsed inward, like a tower with rotten supports. And when Gideon finally understood he was truly falling, he called Sloan. He asked her to meet. She arrived in a cafe that smelled like roasted beans and disappointment. She wore sunglasses indoors, a classic move. Gideon looked rough, not poor yet, but frayed. He reached for her hand. She didn't offer it. He swallowed. "Sloan," he said, voice hoarse, "we can fix this." Sloan tilted her head. "We?" she repeated. Gideon's jaw tightened. "Yes," he said. "We have connections. We can rebuild." Sloan's smile was small. "Gideon," she said, "I don't rebuild." He stared at her. "I invest," she added gently. "And right now?" She looked him over like a stock chart. "You're not a good investment." Gideon's face tightened. "So that's it?" he demanded. "After everything?" Sloan stood, adjusting her coat. You should have married someone who worships you, she said. You married someone who built you. Then she leaned closer and whispered the cruelest truth. And builders always know where to pull. She walked away. Gideon sat alone, staring at his own reflection in the dark coffee. For a moment, he almost looked human. Then his anger returned. But anger doesn't pay bills. Anger doesn't restore trust. Anger doesn't reopen locked doors. Months passed. Gideon sold what he could. Sweets, watches, cars. Luxury peeled away like dead skin. One day, Gideon walked past a billboard that displayed an image of the Halcyon Skybridge design. A sweeping arch of steel and light, elegant and bold. The text beneath it read, Apex Atelier presents Halcyon Skybridge, designed by the architect. Gideon stopped. People around him kept walking, unaware of the man standing there like a ghost. Gideon stared at the image. His chest tightened, because for the first time he saw clearly what he had missed. Ilara had never been small. He had just trained himself not to look. But seeing it now didn't save him. It only hurt. And Crownport, the city that rewards power, moved on without him. 1 year after the Sovereign Gala, Crownport City looked different. Not because the streets changed, because the story changed. The Halcyon Skybridge rose over the water like a promise. Steel ribs and glass panels, lights woven into the structure like veins. It wasn't just a bridge, it was a symbol, not of Gideon's ambition, of Ilara's authorship. On the day of the ribbon cutting, the air was crisp. The crowd was huge. Officials, reporters, engineers, families. Kids held miniature flags. Vendors sold coffee and pastries. It was less exclusive than the Sovereign Gala, more real. Ilara stood near the ribbon wearing a tailored coat. Not gold, not dramatic, just herself. Her hair moved in the wind. Her eyes were calm. Beside her stood Marcus Crowell, smiling with genuine respect. Julian Cade stood on Ilara's other side, hands loosely folded, quiet support as always. Ilara didn't need him to stand there, but she wanted him there, because Julian had never tried to own her story. He had only helped her protect it. Farther back, across the street, a man in a warehouse uniform paused. His badge read, G. Ashford. Gideon. He looked thinner, not starving, but altered. His eyes were tired. He stood behind a fence, watching from a distance like someone who had lost the right to be close. He wasn't here to cause trouble. He wasn't here to beg. He was here because some part of him couldn't resist seeing what he had destroyed. Ilara didn't look back, not because she feared him, because she had already let him go. The mayor approached the microphone. We're honored, the mayor said, to celebrate a project that connects our city and reflects the brilliance of its creators. Applause rose. Ilara stepped toward the mic. When she spoke, her voice carried the same calm authority as it had at the gala, without the edge. Thank you, she said. This bridge isn't just steel and glass. She paused, letting the wind fill the silence. It's trust, she continued. It's community. It's a reminder that what we build matters because people live inside it. She gestured to the engineers, the workers, the planners. This project belongs to everyone who worked on it, she said. Apex Atelier is proud to be one part of that. Applause again. Ilara stepped back. Crowell spoke. Then Julian was asked to say a few words because Cade Systems had contributed critical infrastructure. Julian approached the mic. He didn't perform. He didn't exaggerate. He simply said, Ilara taught me something a long time ago, he said, that the strongest structures aren't the ones that look impressive. He glanced at the bridge. But safely, he looked at Ilara. And she carries more than most. Ilara's throat tightened slightly, not with sadness, with recognition, because Julian had always seen her. After the speeches, the ribbon was placed. The scissors were handed over. Ilara held them for a moment, feeling the weight. A photographer called her name. Ilara turned slightly, smiled. Then she cut. The ribbon fell. Cheers erupted. Confetti rose. People surged forward toward the bridge, excited. Ilara stepped aside, letting the crowd have the moment. Julian moved closer, voice low so it stayed between them. "Walk with me," he said. Ilara nodded. They moved away from the noise toward a quieter edge of the waterfront. The bridge loomed above them like a guardian. Julian stopped near a railing. He looked out at the water for a long moment. Then he spoke carefully, like someone handling something fragile. "I never wanted to rush you," he said. Ilara glanced at him. She could hear the sincerity. Julian continued. "But I also don't want to keep standing beside you silently." He turned, eyes steady. "Whatting you'll guess what I've been feeling for years." Ilara's breath caught, small, quiet. Not because she was shocked, because she was touched by the honesty. Julian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. He didn't open it immediately. He held it like a question. "Ilara," he said, "I don't want to be your savior. I don't want to be your owner." His voice tightened, emotion controlled but real. "I want to be your partner," he said. "The person who sees you even when the room doesn't. The person who never asks you to shrink." Ilara stared at him. In the distance, the crowd's cheers softened into ambient sound. Wind moved across the water. A seagull called once. Julian opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, not flashy. A design that looked like it had been engineered, not purchased. "I had it made," Julian said. "Not because you need proof, because I wanted something that fits you." Ilara's eyes shimmered, not tears spilling, just brightness. Julian swallowed. "If you want to say no," he said, "I'll still be here, as your friend, as your ally." He paused. "But if you want, if you're ready," he exhaled. "Will you marry me?" Ilara looked at the ring, then at Julian. Then, for the first time in a long time, she let herself be soft without fear. She stepped closer. "Julian," she said, voice low. A pause. "I spent 3 years being treated like I didn't exist." Her hand lifted, hovering near his. "And the worst part," she whispered, "was believing maybe I deserved it." Julian's eyes tightened with pain. Ilara shook her head. "But I don't," she said. "And I never did." She took a breath. "I'm not saying yes because I need you," she said. "I'm saying yes because I want a life where I don't have to disappear." Julian's eyes went wet. He nodded once like he couldn't trust his voice. Ilara smiled, real, unguarded. "Yes," she said. "I'll marry you." Julian's shoulders loosened, relief and joy crossing his face. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Ilara stared at it, not as a symbol of ownership, as a symbol of choice. They stood there for a moment, hands linked, the bridge above them. Behind them, across the street, Gideon Ashford watched. He saw Ilara's smile. He saw Julian's hand on hers. And something inside Gideon's face tightened. Not jealousy, not rage, something quieter. Regret. He looked down at his own hands, calloused now, practical. He didn't approach, he didn't shout, because for the first time he understood, you can't demand to be loved. You can only earn it. And he had spent years spending love like it was beneath him. He turned away, walking back toward the warehouse job, toward the life he never imagined. The city didn't notice. The bridge didn't pause. Ilara didn't look back. Because the past doesn't deserve a stage when you finally stepped into the light. Ilara and Julian returned to the crowd. Cameras flashed again. Questions came. Ilara answered with calm grace. And when someone asked, loudly, excitedly, "Ms. Wren, how does it feel to finally be recognized?" Ilara looked toward the sky bridge. She smiled softly. "It feels," she said, "like breathing." If this story stayed with you, if you've ever felt invisible in a room you were supposed to belong in, leave a comment with just one word. Seen. Because you're not alone. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can build is a life where you never have to shrink again.